Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and look what finally came. Anybody who watches my live chats know that I have been eagerly awaiting the Faerie Enchantment Oracle by Ian Daniels. Now, Ian Daniels is the creator of the Vampire Tarot. Tarot of the Vampire, sorry, which is not a deck that I ended up keeping, but I have it on my phone because the guidebook is phenomenal, and I actually learned quite a lot from the guidebook and really enjoyed the guidebook, and the images are gorgeous. It just wasn't something that I used a lot. It's a beautiful deck, but I just never used it, and so if I had it now, would I probably keep it? Yeah, I'm a little bit less inclined to let go of things now because there's always a purpose for them, but I tried to keep to the, if I didn't actually use it in readings, then it needs to kind of move along. And because I had the app for it, I could access the book anytime I wanted. And I do think that the book is phenomenal. And so that was one of the things that most intrigued me at first about this deck, was because, again, the guidebook, and you can see I didn't put it back in the box because it is stickied up. It's black, so I couldn't do so much highlighting, so there's lots of sticky tabs. So I was really excited about the guidebook because his research and his writing was impressive in Tarot of the Vampires, and so I was excited about that. But what really excited me is that everything in here, all of the correlations, all of the sigils and the plants and the stones and the animals connected with the cards, like everything going into this is based off of Celtic mythology, fairy tale, the old fairy tales, and I've said a lot of times that much of what defines what I believe and how I would do any kind of practicing comes from fairy tales. I do believe that there is much to be gained from fairy tales, but when I read it was a little impulsive because I kind of thought, probably won't get that, but when I read sort of the description on the Kickstarter about how much it pulls from fairy tale, old fairy tale, old folk tales, old Celtic mythology, the Celtic pantheon, the fairy court, druidry, I just had to give it a try. So I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. It did finally come. It came from China, and it came in this really thin bubble wrap. I mean, that's all that was. It was just in this package with this thin bubble wrap. And I have to say, coming from China, that was not enough because it really smashed the bottom. Now, I'm not a huge, I don't get too bent out of shape over bangs and stuff. But I guess when you wait for something so long, and, this was a not cheap deck either. For what it's beautifully, the price I think is well and above fair, but when you do pay a little bit more than say a $20 mass market deck, you don't really want to have it be smashed like that. So that was disappointing. Doesn't break my heart, but it was disappointing. I definitely think it could have used a coat of bubble wrap around this and then sliding it into the package, and then it probably would have been fine, although that's a pretty good bang, and so that may have happened no matter what. So, yes, I don't even know where to start. It's so exciting. Obviously, I've read the book because I wanted to be able to point out, pertinent things and such. And so I did read the book. So I am going to be talking about the book, going into the book pretty well. And so if I'm going to put in the description box a skip to just the cards if that's all you're looking for. I do get complaints about going too much into the book. In the past, when I didn't used to do the book, I got complaints about not using the book. Yeah, I find, especially in this particular deck, the book's really important. It's a system, and there's actually a lot here, and I think that, yes, could you use this straight up? I think you'd have a little bit of a hard time, to be honest, using this straight up as an oracle and not reading the book. I think that would be a little difficult in this instance, and you'll see why as we get into it. So I will try to put a link in the description box if you want to skip just to the cards. But otherwise, I'm going to be talking about the book. So I think we will start there. So this is called Faerie Enchantments, and it is by Ian Daniels. And part of the reason that I think that this took quite a while is he did end up adding more things in. He added more things extensively to the book. And I will say the book is, for its size, which is the size of the cards itself, it's actually got a lot of information. It is, I don't know if, 107 pages. But it's really packed full of information and images. So I will probably, to be honest, black the edge of the pages. I don't know. Patrick gave me his one of his extra Marielles and he blacked the edge of the book, and it looked awesome. So I'm kind of tempted with this one. We shall see. So yeah, so it's beautifully done with beautiful photographs, but images, extra image. These are not just images that are these are not images that are on the card. So they're extra images describing, whatever's going on, whatever that he's talking about. There's some charts and things. The text itself does not have any images of the cards. Obviously, that would have made it a longer book, but the text does not have images. I would have loved to have it a longer book and have the images, but it's just when you're trying to do these things, you're trying to keep it contained into a certain size, and a lot goes into trying to figure out what's the best bet to put into a guidebook and into cards and things. And so that's something I would have liked, but it's not a complaint. It's just because then you have to go try to find the card if you want to look at the image. So even a little thumbnail for me would have been, I quite prefer that in books, in guidebooks, because I don't really always want to go and hunt for the card and then be able to read about it or put the cards back in order or anything like that, which would be even more complicated in this deck, and I'll get to that later. So anyways, but again, this is not so much nitpicking, it's just kind of pointing those things out. The book is beautifully done. You can see the gorgeous colors here. It's like sepia muted. It's not just black and white. There are faint hints of reds. I love this. Look at this. For Amanda, beloved queen of my gates of summer. How beautiful is that for that sort of putting it in who it's for? That's gorgeous. And so then we have our table of contents here, and it goes into a lot of information at the beginning. And I'm not going to obviously read all of this because, that's for you to do with your book. But I do want to point out that a couple things. It says the predominant principle of Faerie Enchantments is personal creative expression. So it's not about following extensive rites and rituals. If you're going to use this for magic, and he really does go in and discuss in a couple places here the difference between ceremonial magic and hedge witchery. And this is much more along the lines of hedge witchery. He goes into really talking about the different words used for the idea or the concept of what we would think of as witch in the Celtic tradition. So, for example, it uses the foremost sorcerer in Celtic mythology is Gwydion, whose name derives from Gwydyn. I'm sure this is Welsh. I cannot speak Welsh, so it will be slaughtered. The Welsh word for both scientist and witch. So it's the idea of the one who knows, and that idea of the knowing person, the person who knows, is the premise of Faerie Enchantments, which I really love that. It also talks about Faerie Enchantments is most closely related to the magical workings of hedge witchery. This is in contrast to the practices of what have been named high magic, which often involves a strict religious ethic of study and rites in order to ascend a supposed spiritual hierarchy. And so he talks about how that's not his. Faerie Enchantments is about experiencing your world in new, inspired, and radiant ways, and employing what he considers witchcraft to tweak reality tenderly in order to manifest your desires. It's about embarking on a wondrous and creative adventure. And he talks more about hedge witchery. He then talks about the idea of fairy, and of course this is why I purchased this deck, because for me there are very few fae decks that align with my understanding of the fae, and that would be Tarot of the Hidden Realms and Brian Froud's Fairy Oracle. I prefer the Fairy Oracle over Heart of Fairy. I have them both, but I personally keep on my fae because I do have a shelf that is dedicated to fae, and that I keep Tarot of the Hidden Realms on that, as well as the Fairy Oracle by Brian Froud. Those are the only two decks that really, for me, kind of tap into the essence of what I experience as fae since a very young child. And so he goes on to talk about Celtic deities and spirits live in what is called the other world or fairy. He talks about different things. It's also called the Summerland. In Welsh, it's Anwen, while the fortress of the fairy court was Caer Sedai. And again, I'm so bad. I've looked up how to pronounce Welsh. Unless I really put some study into it, I'm going to end up slaughtering it. It is not as disrespect to other languages. It is simply the fact that I only speak English. But again, it's also known as the Summerlands, the Enchanted Islands. The other world is called the She in Irish, although for me, I grew up with more of an understanding of the She as directly, which is Sadhihe. I consider the She to be more the actual Fae. So Fae, another word for Fae would be the She. But he also calls it the other world. Anwen, which is the Welsh, means very deep, and is described as being beneath or underlying the known world, and very connected to Awen, A-W-E-N, which is the source of magic. So this is the source. It talks about how they believe, he talks about how the Celts, as well as viewed magic and energy and life force. And he does make note that and I agree, this is how I view it, the realm of fairy was not thought of as being separate from the physical world, but that it was as real, if not more so, as the manifest world in which they lived. It was thought of as a very foundation of the physical universe, the ethereal workings that gave form and vitality to all manifest life, including themselves. To our ancestors, the secret world and the perceived world were one and the same, and so they honored the spiritual aspects of animals, trees, and the cycle of the year and of places. The deities featured on the cards can also be understood as spiritual allegories, if you want to see them that way. The elements of nature, the elements, and the season. In Celtic mythology, Tir na Nog, which is the land of youth, is one of the names of fairy world as well. It is this concept that is central to fairy enchantments, that at our deepest spiritual core, we are born of this land of youth and abundance, or Tir na Nog, from a divine essence that is constantly flowing through all life within us and all around us. In Druidic teaching, this life essence is the wellspring from which all life arises and which maintains its energy and vitality. The magical elixir is referred to as Awen in Druidic lore and practices. This flowing spirit of Awen is divine, and so this is for me, this is very much like chi. This is that basic core essential energy. This flowing spirit of Awen is divine in nature, bringing pure light and pure love. So then it goes on. I love this because human and animals and most of the matter on earth contain these elements. The whole cosmos is within you, and you are within all matter. You contain the original essence of all things, and so everything contains your essence at some deep level. Everything's connected, and this is something very integral to my belief system. As you have such a fundamental connection with all things, this implies that you have an inert knowledge of everything and the ability to influence the atomic vibration of reality and therefore its essence. And so then it goes on to talk about by attuning yourself, this is how you can manifest things by coming into attunement for what is already within you. This deck is also set up to, and we'll look a little more closely at that. I'll be pulling 3 cards out shortly so we can kind of walk through it. But this deck is created to use either for creating, setting intentions, working magic, however you want to approach that. I tend to set intentions. That's kind of my way of approaching things. But it can be used directly as for magical working, setting intentions, and divination. It does talk about how to use it strictly as an oracle deck if that's how you want to approach it. And it has a very specific way of going about and doing it. And it talks about there are 40 cards, and they mirror the crystallization from pure flowing essence of Awen to the manifestations of physical matter. It also does directly relate to the tarot, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And it does really work with the idea of the 4 elements. And so I should be removing these, so if I have to come back, I know where I'm at. So it goes in, it talks a little bit more about witchcraft and what that might be. I love, this is what encouraged me to buy this. There are items on the back of the cards, which we'll talk about, and these items or ingredients are defined by Celtic symbolism in fairy tales, the etymology of Celtic root words, studies in mythology, and related meanings in both astrology and tarot. And so that was really important to me because again, most of how I see the world is very richly influenced by my extreme fascination with fairy tale from a child onward that never has abated. So now it gets into the anatomy of the card. So let me zoom out a little bit so we can, this is maybe a little different than some of my walkthroughs, and I will do a flip through, and I will put a link, a time link where you can just click it to go straight to the walkthrough of the cards. But this is a little bit more than just an oracle deck, and so I really want to give it due weight. So I have the cards in here backwards. So let's just take a quick look while we're at it. Here's the box. It's beautiful. It's accented by rose gold. The inside has that beautiful, almost like vintage floral that we saw at the beginning of the book. It's a stunning box, and it's a really sturdy one. Like, that must have taken a really good bang to get it to dent like that. It's a really good box. And so that's the box. It has this beautiful sigil, which we'll talk about later. I need to look in more, but you can see that there are runes here, and this is has quite specific, although I didn't see a specific section. I thought there would be a specific section kind of breaking this down, because that is important, and I know that it does have variety of meanings here. You obviously have the sun, you have the moon, you have runes around here. You also, I think these are mostly all runes. Yeah, so you have runes here, and so I thought there would be a section like specifically on that chart, and there may be. I did kind of read through everything, but I could have missed it. So I know that Ian Daniels is creating a Facebook group in order to kind of work with this particular deck, and so that is also something that you can do to kind of gain better knowledge. The cards themselves are stunning, mostly very muted tones. I obviously don't want to show them all, but they're very muted tones, really gorgeous. They are color, but they are very muted. The edges are rose gold like the front of the deck, and then the backs have a lot of information. So they have a title, they have these 3 keywords that are used in a variety of different ways. The main message of the card, if you're reading it in an oracle way, is the one directly above the sigil or the rune here. So for this one, success would be the main oracle word. And then different items that are associated with this either deity or a Fae energy. And so you have color, you have stone like the malachite, you have sometimes the moon that it's related to, or sometimes day or night. You have plant that's related to juniper, you have animals, bear and raven, you have metal of iron, and you have homestead, which can be like a place that you could, possibly be related to this particular Fae. So this is used in, depending on how we're going to talk about that in a second. So that's how each of the cards are. One of the cards, they are borderless, other than this one card, which has a border on the top and the bottom, and that is intentional because this is a very special card, which we will talk about. And the first 2 cards so this is the Beloved, which represents you, the 2 aspects of yourself, sort of yourself and your magical self, which is stunning because look, it's a raven, which is my totem animal. So we're going to talk about this. This is the Beloved. And then the second one is Awen, which is that sense of pure essence and pure energy. So these 2 stand apart from the rest of the cards, and this one in particularly does. And so we have that border. The rest of them are borderless. So this was done intentionally for a reason. It would have kind of been neat for this one, I suppose, to have a border at the top and the bottom as well. But, again, that's nitpicky. So I'm going to set these aside for the sake of looking at these cards, because I want to take the first 3 here, so that we can, because he uses these 3 to explain how sort of the alchemy of the card. So we're going to look, so obviously you have the image on the front. If you've seen Ian Daniels' Tarot of the Vampires, it has a very similar energy to that. You have beautiful imagery, so you can obviously use that imagery itself. Like this is a amazing image of Cernunnos, because you have this very very elemental and nature energy here, with that dove just sitting so carefully in his hands, being so unafraid. That's a stunning image, but we're going to talk about those in a minute. For right now, let's just turn these over to look at sort of how you would approach these. In general, in terms of setting up an intention setting, the recommended would be to use 3 cards. You can just use 1 card, and you can use 2 cards, but then you have to take 2 things from one and 1 from another. And it's really set up to be, in my opinion, from reading it, it's set up to be used with 3, sorry, these things out of whack are going to drive me bonkers. Set up to use it because you use the keyword from the first card, if you're setting intention. So this would be you setting intentions, doing magic, doing the enchantments that it talks about. You would pick 3 cards that represent what it is that you want. The first card, you take the first word, the second card, the second, and the third card, the third. So initialize concentrated intuition is what the intention of this particular set of cards. Now, obviously, if you change the direction, right, absorb concentrated potential. It changes that sort of key reason for setting these particular cards out, and so you're going to pay attention to those things. But when you're setting it out, the intention is first, second, and third keyword, and you would organize them in the way that stated your intention to the best of your ability. So that is the combined, that is the declaration. So for example, for this one, your decree is to initialize concentrated intuition. And so you would take that and you could turn that into a more detailed statement, which like he says right here. So an affirmation that is written out could be, initialize a concentrated focus of my intuitive powers upon the encounter I had yesterday in order to guide me. So then it becomes a more detailed statement of your intention. And so each of the cards names the Fae energy and or deity, however you see that, names at the top. We have 3 keywords. So again, if you're using it for setting intention and or doing a magical working, the first of 3 cards, you use the first, the second, and the third you would use as the final word. Now, if you're using this as just an oracle deck, they recommend this Dawn is about intuition, Cernunnos is about magic, Methanwe, I'm so bad, is about potential. And I think I'll probably have to take this deck and work with the correct Welsh, work on getting the names correct. If I'm going to be using them to set intention, I feel like I need to say them correctly. So I will be working on that. But you would be looking at these as potential, magic, and intuition if you're going to use it just as an oracle deck. Then we have a particular sigil. So here we can see it's a sigil for sun. We can see this is related to lunar, and you can see moonstone night, sunstone day. So you can see that's kind of a day and a night kind of energy. Here we actually have a rune. And so we have whatever its runic symbol is, because you also, I will talk about that in a second. And then, as I said, you have below it the things that are associated, colors, stones, timing like summer solstice, daytime, nighttime, different moon, you know, a full moon, a half moon, that type of thing. Trees and or plants, so ash on beach, animals, goat, snipe, objects, ring, gold, silver, and then where, so facing south in the forest by a lake, where these, and these are all taken from fairy tale, Celtic mythology, and etymology of the words, those types of and Druidic lore and these types of things. So that they're very particular, they're not just randomly placed there. These are picked for the energy surrounding that particular fae being in fairy tale and in Celtic mythology and etymology. So it's really, it's, you know, a lot of work has gone into creating these. So in his sort of how you would go about using this to set intention, he uses these 3 cards, but you would pick 3 cards that when you read the intention from first, second, and third, it states your intention. So you're going to look to combine the cards to state your intention. The second step is to write down the 3 words of your decree. So you would write down initialize concentrated intuition. And then you might write out a little bit more. So for example, his initialize a concentrated focus of my intuitive powers upon specifically an encounter I had yesterday in order to get guidance or to guide me. So you would actually, you want to make this affirmation very clear, including names and places or times if that is important, but make sure that you keep that sentence short and direct, and so you would write that down. The next stage is to create a fairy rune. So the way that you do that is by combining. So this, he talks in the book about, which I'll get when I get to that section here, but he does talk about the use of sigils in chaos magic. And so he does something similar in the sense of, and this is any type of sigil working, this happens. I'll even do it with geomancy, where I can take 2 sigils and combine them, and that will create a sort of empowered intention between the 2. Right? So sigil magic or sigil working, you often will combine sigils. And so it will have you, and it doesn't do it for you because it depends on your combination. You would take this sigil, and this sigil and create sort of a rune. So let's just kind of do something really rough here. But so for example, for these 2, so I might start with this kind of moon energy here. And then because this kind of is round, it looks like it can fit nicely here, I might stick that here. And then I can either, you know, maybe do this N above it, or I might end up doing this straight across it like that and creating this sigil here, or below it, you know, just however you want. But you would combine these together to create a fairy rune or a fae rune by combining the three energies of what it is. And you may, you know, write that onto a piece of parchment paper to be able to burn later in when you're setting your intentions, or you may want to, you know, like burn it onto a piece of wood, you know, just depending on what you're doing. But you would combine the three runes in some way to make a fairy or fae rune. So that's the next stage, and he talks about how to do that. There's a section on page 30, and it tells you go to page 32, and it talks about how you can combine these runes and gives you some examples of how you might combine these things together to create a combined rune that embodies the initialized concentrated intuition in the implementing of this particular set of 3 cards. So then it has you gather the magical components for your enchantment or your intention setting or your spell, however you, depending on your practice and your path, however you might do that. And so it asks you to try to include something from each. Now, you don't have to have all of these things, but you might want to take something specific. So you may want to take a clear topaz to represent this particular energy, or a ring. You might just take a ring that you have to associate that, or you may just not take anything specific, and you may decide you're going to face south when you're setting your intention, and that's going to represent the energy of this card. You may have a sunstone here. You may have an emblem that has an eagle on it, or a piece of gold here. Or you may be in the forest when you're doing it, right? You may just pick something golden, or you may be doing it during the daytime, but you're going to kind of pick and choose. You don't need all of these things, but you want to have 1 or 2 things from each of these, you know, a sprig of mistletoe, a piece of silver. So you could even have a silver ring that would embody both of those things together, or a gold and silver mixed ring, which can embody all 3 of them, right? Just you kind of pull from them to just so you have some from each. And then, of course, you have the words that you have. And you can do different things. It gives very different ways in which you might pull these together, either to make a charm, a poppet, or you might just use them as words themselves and write out a verse from words, the keywords, these words here. And so you don't have to have those. I think he does a really good job, you know, giving you a lot of options. Like you could have actual items, or you could simply use the words to create a little verse or a little phrase. You don't, so he gives you a lot of examples of how you could use these items or components at the bottom to bring into your intention setting. So there really isn't an expectation that you have to have a whole bunch of things in order to do this. There's a lot of different ways in which you could approach it, even to the degree of just obviously using the cards themselves to represent that. And then it talks about, you know, going into the right time and how to create a mental sanctuary. And it talks about having everything close by. And the 8th step, you're going to perform the enchantment by following the operation of your enchantment procedure. Depending on what you're doing, you may be like taking a ring, right, facing south in a forest at moonlight, at nighttime, right? So you may be doing all of these things, and you may have written it on a piece of paper, and you're going to light that initialized concentrated intuition. You may going to burn that to set that into motion, whatever you're going to be able to do. And then it has you read the affirmation that you wrote, and then end with Awen, and it says to be really low, Awen for Awen, in long, slow breaths, so mote it be. Now, I wouldn't do that because that to me, I relate very closely, so mote it be with witchcraft or Wiccan, and I don't consider myself to be a Wiccan, so I would feel weird about that, but I would probably do a sound. I tend to use 3, like a tone of the drum 3 times to kind of start and end things, just depending on how, you know, you kind of, again, make it your own, how you are going to wrap it up and kind of make it finished. Or for me, a lot of times it's putting a piece of clove into whatever flame, because I always have flame going, you know, put a piece of clove in, that's kind of let it be, it may be so kind of feel. So, you know, you kind of make this your own. And then it talks about putting this all into a box. Now, it says you could put it into the Faerie Enchantment box. I wouldn't personally do that because my cards will be in there, but you could have a special box that you use just for this purpose, to put those components in and leave it alone for 3 days, which I love. The number 3 is really powerful in Fae lore, fairy lore, fairy tales, but definitely in Celtic mythology and Celtic lore, the number 3 is really powerful. It's probably why it's my number, because I grew up, you know, there's sets of 3s. If you read old tales and old poems, it's 3 of this and 3 of that. There's lots of sets of 3. It's like when you read Buddhism, it's all lots of 4s. So then leave, okay, had a work call. Now I'm not sure where we were. Oh, it talks about 3, so leave it alone for 3 days, to let everything sort of amalgamate. And then it gives you some examples, but you can see, like, this is very specifically set up to use it. And again, you do not have to be a witch. I don't consider myself to be a witch. You do not have to be a Wiccan. You do not have to be a druid. You do not have to be a shaman. Like, you don't have to be anything specific. Some people just set intentions. So you think, for the way that I approach things is that if I want to set my intentions out in the world, I very specifically use tarot cards that set the intention. I use the elements. I use sigils in the form of geomancy, or sometimes oghams, or sometimes runes, but generally in my own practice it's going to be geomancy or oghams, and so and just setting out that intention into the world. So even if you don't believe that what you're intending is going to affect the physical world, the act of just being focused in what it is that you want and focusing in your intention, that has relevancy in getting your energy and you motivated to go in the direction that you want to go in. There's a lot of different ways that you can approach this, and he does, I feel like, do a pretty good job at goes very specifically towards hedge witchery, setting enchantments. He calls it enchantments, is what the terminology he mostly uses here. He does talk about setting intention, I think, as well, but he does call it an enchantment. It's Faerie Enchantments. But I feel like he does a good job of letting you know how you can go about using this in a couple different ways. And then he gives you some examples of how you might go about doing that. So let's see, let's go back to the guidebook. So we kind of talked about the anatomy of the card, and we kind of talked about, actually they go this way. We kind of talked about, the process, that main process of setting up your intention and or your enchantment or your spell or whatever you're working, whatever you want to call it. And then I really love, because he brings in, I'm a big numerology person, and so it talks about using numbers. So you might use, say, 3 feathers if you want to be working with your intuition. You may be using 5 if you want radical change. You may be using 10 if you're wanting to actually manifest, get something to the manifestation stage. So I love that aspect. And he gives a list of the 10 numbers and what those mean. And it goes into, I think, really good. It has the basic things you think of new beginnings, say, for number 1, balance for number 2, growth is for me in number 3, structure for number 4, 5 we have radical change. That can be positive and that can be negative, right? That 5 is that shake up. Sorry, this is choppy. I should be working, but I had to look at this, people. I had to look at this. So anyways, I really like I like the keywords that he used for the numbers. They include all the ones that I use and then expand on it. I really like this numerology section. And then it talks about how you might connect those with particular incense scents, which I cannot use, but it does kind of give you that as well. And then it talks about divination. And so it talks about the fact, as I said, that when you're using this just for divinatory reasons, the predominant meaning of the card is this bottom keyword here, and so that's important to note. Now, can you use all three of them? Of course, you can just use this as receive personal blessing, but in terms of when you're combining them together, which seems to be quite, you know, intent on 3 cards, you would really be looking at that last one for that sort of message that you're trying to get in a divinatory way. I do like how he talks about now, obviously, I cannot go into everything here, but I do like how he talks about soothsayers and oracles who are entranced by the spirit of Awen. So I love he goes into talking about that. Again, a lot of information pulled and gleaned from Celtic mythology, again, etymology and fairy tales, and I just absolutely love that. He talks a lot about 3 cards, so again, past, present, future, subconscious, conscious, and the energy that combines those two. I quite like that. And then, of course, you would go, you know, into the description of the actual Fae energy to get even more information, just as you would in any other oracle deck. And so he gives an example. If you pick these particular cards, freedom, being, and clarity were the bottom 3 keywords. And then he kind of gives an example of how you might read that. And then it goes into the section on fairy runes, which I talked about, and making of charms, magical charms, and again, it's beautiful imagery here. I do actually wish this was a book. Like, I felt like he could have written a full book about this, and I'm sure part of the length of because I know he added things in here, so it probably started as much more just this, and he kept adding amazing information, so that's, I mean, well worth the wait for that. But oh, I would just love to have a full book on this. Talking about making charms, which is very similar. Some of these things here are very similar to this, where I've added a crystal, a piece of wood, a feather, and a charm here, which I had shown before, but this kind of reminded me of that. And so he kind of gives examples there of that. Talks about a book of shadows and how you might, record things, getting a book that you're going to keep recording of the things that you do. So specifically, I'm going to be using, just as I kind of play around with and work with this, Patrick has sent me these amazing field notebooks that are the moons. And so I'm going to be using this I already track my intention settings, but I'm going to be using these books to do so. Like, I may do one for my geomancy intention settings, but probably not. I'll probably just do full moon one to start and can kind of keep track of, the date, what did you use, what was your intention, and then leave a place for you to go back and see how you felt that manifested itself into the world. So he talks about that. So it doesn't have to be, that's why my point being is that, it doesn't have to be some amazing, go to Benabel Wen's YouTube channel and see her grimoire flip through will make you, cry in your milk as to how sad yours might look. But it doesn't have to be anything fancy like that. It doesn't have to be a book of shadows or a book of magic. It can just be you kind of tracking your intentions, and that's also a good thing. So then he goes in and he talks about the cards themselves. The card images are intended to instill the particular essence and feeling of each card, energy, and meaning. They are ambiguous in nature, allowing you to interpret them in your own unique way, and in order that different meanings can be gleaned when a number of cards are presented together. So it leaves it open to intention. Is she really sad, or is she introspective? What is she connecting? She's listening to this tree. Like, there's all kinds of ways in which you can, so he goes at it from a perspective of there is isn't supposed to be one that's specifically light or shadow. It's supposed to be left ambiguous so that you can read it intuitively that way. And obviously using the card backs will be helpful, or the keywords and such. These symbols, the symbols on the back, have been inspired by the deity or the Fae energy and the card meaning. It gives some examples of some of the cards. It does talk about the 3 words, which we already talked about. I don't think we need to talk about that any further. When using the card purely as an oracle, the word directly above the rune is the predominant energy, which we talked about. The rune featured on each card is the fairy rune specific to the deity depicted. To create a unique one, you pull them together, which we talked about. It talks about all the different components that are on there. And then he gives you a section, because the phases of the moon are in some of the cards as well. And so he talks about them. So the dark moon for eliminating and banishing, the waxing moon for growth and expansion, the full moon for magnification. So he goes into the main moons that we would see on the card, so that's wonderful. He also talks about the trees and the plants being connected with the Ogham or Ogham, however you want to pronounce that tree alphabet. So he talks about that. So you actually have the name of it, like one of them I saw Dware. You'd have that. I think that's actually on there. But we'll see that when we go through the cards. And he goes into talking about how those runes, the animals and the birds featured on the cards have symbolic significance in folklore and fairy tales. For example, the fox is known for its cunning wisdom in many fairy tales, often portrayed as a trickster or a master of illusion. The Celts believed the fox to be a guide into the mysterious spirit world. Therefore, it's presented in the card of the fox goddess Shiona, whose magic power is reflective, psychic, and illusionary in nature. The crow features as the totem animal, of course, of the Morgan. And so it goes on. So all of the things depicted, he really goes into it quite clearly that these are very intentionally picked for the cards, as well as even the objects. And so he goes into a lot. He really, I think, does a great job. He talks about nature spirits, beautiful imagery here, gives again examples. And then he talks about the crow and the bride. So the crow and the bride, this is this particular card. So this beloved card is called the Beloved. You can see the title. Is your personal spirit guide. She or he can be described as your soul, wholly part of you, yet often beyond your conscious awareness. Although constantly connected to you as an extension of your earthly self, she can appear intangible and often experienced as a separate being. Your beloved resides in the ether, but is inseparably unified with you. This mystical marriage means that she represents your spiritual quest, unique magical creativity, and the perception of the universe. However, your beloved presents these with pure clarity without the distractions of the ego. And he goes in and talks about the ego. And then he talks about this mystical marriage to your beloved allows you to embrace the whole of creation within the human heart. It is a journey of returning to the divine through love, from duality back to oneness, from separateness back to belonging. The nature of your beloved can be determined by your personal astrological birth chart. You need to know your sun, moon, and ascendant sign, and then you can pull your soul cards. And so then he gives you a chart in here to show, okay, you would go to your sun card. So I'm a Libra, so Abel would be my sun card. My moon card would be Meriden, and which is awesome. And my ascendant card would be Gwian. So bad, so bad. So after we go through the cards, I'm going to come back and pull those three so we can see them. So it talks about how the moon card is your, the sun card is your consciousness and is your outer projection of your personality. The moon card is your inner self or emotional self. And your ascendant card is how other people see you and can understand you. So this is from astrology. And so that allows you to kind of use those cards to tap into those aspects of yourself. So I'm excited to see those for myself. So we'll come back to that. And then it shows the connection. So it says that each of the 22 major arcana cards are represented in these cards, as well as the fundamental aspects of the elemental minor arcana. And so it combines some of the cards to be the different ones. So here we have basically the court of fairy. So we see all of the cards. Now, this is going to highlight one of the problems that I see with this deck. There's other decks that I have to work around this. The druid animal and plant cards are like this. I just feel like it's not, I just don't know why they just don't do one of two things. Either the cards need to be numbered, which is okay because this actually is a progression. Like I talk about at the beginning how that from the beloved to Quill is a progression. And so if that's the case, then just number them, because then you obviously know where you are in the progression. I give all due respect, because this is an amazing deck, amazing amount of work. And again, a couple of my Will Worthington decks, which you know I'm a huge fan of, I just, for quick ease of use, putting either a number here, or very easily just putting these in alphabetical order, which I understand why it's not, because it is actually in order. There is a progression, and so in that case I would say just put a number. It could be right on the back of the card, number 1, Quill. Actually, that's what I can do, and then I don't have to do anything on the front. I can just write it in the corner on the back. So I probably will end up doing that in a pretty rose gold marker, which I'm pretty sure I have. And can be with this gloss, if I decide I don't like it, it's very easy to wipe that off with a little bit of alcohol very carefully. Not saturating, but a nice little light one. So I probably will do that, because, or I even have a white, I have a white pen that might mark on it. So anyways, so that is for me a little bit of a problem, but it's a quibble. So it lists here the name of it. So we have the beloved. So let me put these back. I think I have them right in order. So we have the beloved here. For the beloved, for letters, you would actually use your own initials, because this is yourself. And this is a manifestation of essence. And this reflects the minor arcana. This is pure essence, so this is Awen, and it's AH is the letters that would go with this, and it reflects pure essence, and it reflects the major arcana as a whole. So we have minor U and major the divine essence, right? And then it talks about Mathenway, which is the letter N. It's the essence of spirit, and it reflects the Fool. And so it goes through. This would be the Fool. This would be the Magician. This would be the High Priestess, which we'll go through as we go through them all. It goes through all of the major arcana, and then we have the Ace of Wands, the 2, 3, and 4 of Wands, the 5, 6, and 7 of Wands, but mostly the 6 number, the 8, 9, and 10 of Wands, then through the Cups, the Swords, and the Pentacles. So you do have a direct relation to the tarot cards also represented here. We're talking about a really complex system of correspondences, mostly to, again, Celtic mythology and druidry and fairy tale, and runes and ogams or oghams, but also then you have the connection of how those would relate and connect to the tarot. And so we have that all listed here, and then it tells you the page number of where to find the more detailed writings. And then it goes right into, okay, here's the beloved card. Most of them, well, no, they're all about, some of them, like Awen, again, that's also a primary card. That has about 2 whole pages. The rest have a little bit like a page and a quarter. A page and a quarter, a page and a half. So they definitely gives the most weight to the first 2 cards. But lots of detail here, and we'll see. Let's check out one that's an actual. Well, we'll wait till we get to Awen, or to Anya. So Anya is, for me, a personal Fae energy, because this is in my person, in my family history. We the beginning of the Fitzgeralds are connected with Anya. And so this is, so she is sort of my part of my actual lineage in a magical sense, and in a wonderful, fun family history sense, and both, however you want to see it. So I'll read a little bit more specifically about her, so you can get an idea of that when we get to her.